In a sprawling ranch house in Scottsdale, Arizona, a 68-year-old retired tech entrepreneur was about to discover that the children she'd been financially supporting for decades had been secretly plotting to control her wealth. What started as a casual family dinner took a sinister turn when Patricia Coleman overheard a phone conversation that revealed her own family's calculated plan to have her declared incompetent. But Patricia wasn't just any vulnerable senior. She was a former Silicon Valley executive who'd built 3 successful companies from the ground up. Her family was about to learn that underestimating Patricia Coleman was the biggest mistake they'd ever make. Her counterattack would be swift, methodical, and financially devastating for those who thought they could manipulate her into giving up her independence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Patricia Coleman's perfectly manicured backyard as she reviewed her monthly financial statements on her tablet. At 68, she maintained the same disciplined routine that had made her millions in the tech industry: up at 6 a.m., coffee by the pool, financial review before breakfast. The numbers told a story she'd been ignoring for too long. $18,000 monthly to her daughter Sandra's luxury lifestyle in Newport Beach, $12,000 monthly to her son Michael's consulting business that never seemed to produce actual clients, and another $8,000 covering various grandchildren's private school tuitions and expenses. Patricia had built Coleman Technologies from a garage startup to a $200 million acquisition by Microsoft in 2018. She'd always believed that wealth was meant to be shared with family, but lately, something felt different about the constant requests for money. The gratitude had disappeared, replaced by expectation and entitlement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. "Mom, emergency. The kids' school is threatening suspension over tuition. Need $15,000 ASAP. Can you wire today?" Patricia frowned. She'd just paid the quarterly tuition 2 weeks ago. This was the third emergency this month. As a former CEO who'd learned to read people and situations with surgical precision, her instincts were telling her something was wrong. The sprawling Scottsdale ranch house had been her dream home after the Microsoft acquisition. 6,000 square feet of southwestern elegance with mountain views and enough space for family gatherings that rarely happened anymore. Her children visited only when they needed money, and those visits had become increasingly frequent and increasingly expensive. Patricia walked through her home office, a shrine to her business achievements. Awards from Forbes, Fortune, and various tech publications lined the walls. Photos showed her with CEOs, politicians, and innovators who'd shaped the digital age. She'd been one of only 12 women to lead tech companies to 9-figure acquisitions in the 1990s. The idea that anyone could manipulate or control her was laughable. Yet, as she looked at her bank statements, a disturbing pattern emerged. Her monthly outflows to family had increased by 340% over the past 2 years. What had started as helping with temporary difficulties had become permanent financial dependency. Sandra's husband Brad had quit his job as a sales manager 2 years ago, claiming he was, quote, pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities that never materialized. Michael had been between projects for 18 months, living in a $4,000 per month apartment in Austin that Patricia paid for. The doorbell interrupted her financial analysis. Through the security system, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 40s holding a clipboard and wearing a badge from Desert Valley Senior Services. "Miss Coleman? I'm Lisa Martinez from Desert Valley Senior Services. Your daughter Sandra asked me to stop by for a wellness assessment." Patricia's blood chilled. She hadn't requested any assessment, and Sandra had no authority to arrange such a visit. "I'm sorry, but I didn't request your services, and I certainly don't need a wellness assessment." "Oh, I understand the confusion," Lisa said with practiced sympathy. Family members often arrange these consultations when they're concerned about a loved one's safety and well-being. It's completely routine for people in your age demographic. "My age demographic?" Patricia's voice carried the steel that had once made venture capitalists reconsider their negotiating positions. "I'm 68 years old, I run 5 miles every morning, I manage a complex investment portfolio, and I maintain a household that most people half my age couldn't handle." What exactly is the concern here? Lisa consulted her clipboard with the efficiency of someone who'd delivered this speech many times before. Well, according to your daughter, there have been some incidents of confusion, perhaps some memory lapses. She mentioned finding expired food in your refrigerator, unopened mail piling up, and some concerning financial decisions. Every word was a fabrication. Patricia's household ran with military precision. Her mail was organized daily, her refrigerator was immaculate, and her financial decisions had generated millions in returns over the past 5 years. But she recognized the strategy immediately. It was the same technique hostile competitors had used to undermine her credibility in boardrooms decades ago. Create doubt about competence, then exploit that doubt for advantage. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Patricia said carefully. I don't require your services, and I'd like you to leave my property. Lisa's expression shifted slightly, revealing something calculating beneath the professional concern. Miss Coleman, resistance to assistance is often a sign of the very issues we're trained to address. Perhaps we could just do a brief home safety evaluation? Your daughter is very worried about you living alone in such a large house. The phrase living alone was loaded with implication. Patricia had chosen to live independently after her husband Frank's death 3 years ago. She'd rejected suggestions from both children that she sell the house and move closer to them. Suggestions that had become more frequent and more insistent as her wealth had grown through smart investments. My daughter has no legal authority to arrange assessments of my well-being, Patricia said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to shutting down corporate takeover attempts. Please leave, and please don't return without my explicit invitation. After Lisa left, Patricia sat in her living room processing what had just happened. Sandra had sent a stranger to evaluate her mental capacity without her knowledge or consent. This wasn't concern. This was reconnaissance. She pulled out her phone and called Sandra directly. Mom, how are you feeling today? Sandra's voice was artificially bright, the tone one might use with a confused elderly relative. I'm feeling curious about why you sent someone from Desert Valley Senior Services to my house without discussing it with me first. A pause. Oh, that. Mom, I've been so worried about you lately. When you forgot about lunch last week, and then you mentioned having trouble with the TV remote, I thought maybe. Sandra, I didn't forget about lunch. You canceled 30 minutes before we were supposed to meet. And I never mentioned having trouble with anything electronic. I literally built a technology company. Mom, sometimes we don't realize when we're having memory issues. It's very common at your age. Dr. Williams always says, What Dr. Williams? I haven't seen a doctor in 6 months, and when I did, I received a clean bill of health. Another pause, longer this time. Well, I just think it would be good to have someone professional evaluate whether you're safe living alone in that big house. What if you fell? What if you had a medical emergency? The conversation was following a script, Patricia realized. Sandra had been coached on how to express these concerns, how to plant seeds of doubt about her mother's competence. But by whom and why? Sandra, let me be very clear. I don't need assistance. I don't want assistance, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Don't send any more service providers to my house without my permission. Of course, Mom. I'm just worried about you. We all are. After hanging up, Patricia walked to her home office and opened her laptop. 30 years of building and selling companies had taught her to investigate unusual behavior methodically. She started with Desert Valley Senior Services, running a corporate background check that revealed interesting connections to several assisted living facilities and a pattern of aggressive marketing to families of wealthy seniors. Her phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Texo. Hey, Mom. Sandra mentioned you seemed a little confused today when that nice lady stopped by. Are you feeling okay? The coordination was immediate and obvious. Sandra had called Michael within minutes of their conversation, coaching him on the narrative they were building. Patricia felt a familiar sensation from her business days, the recognition that she was being played. Michael, I wasn't confused. I was irritated that your sister sent a stranger to my house to evaluate my mental capacity without my knowledge. Wouldn't you be irritated if someone did that to you? Well, sure, but Mom, sometimes family has to step in when they see warning signs. Remember last month when you called me 3 times about the same investment question? Patricia's memory was photographic when it came to financial matters. She had never called Michael about investments. He barely understood his own 401k. "Michael, I have never called you about investment questions. You called me asking for advice about your retirement account, and I gave you the name of a financial advisor. Are you sure? Because I distinctly remember." "I'm positive, and I'm starting to wonder why both you and Sandra are suddenly so concerned about my mental state. Is there something I should know about?" Michael's tone became defensive. "Mom, we're just looking out for you. That house is too big, you're all alone, and you're not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to consider something more manageable, somewhere with people around to help if you need it." The pieces were falling into place with the clarity of a well-structured business plan. Her children weren't just concerned about her well-being. They were building a case for her incompetence. The question was why, and the answer was becoming increasingly obvious as she looked at her financial records. Over the past 2 years, while Patricia had been generously supporting both children's lifestyles, they'd been accumulating debt far beyond what her monthly assistance could cover. Sandra's house in Newport Beach was mortgaged to the hilt. Michael's consulting business was a fiction, covering gambling debts and failed day trading ventures. They needed more than monthly support. They needed access to her principal assets. As the evening sun painted the desert mountains gold, Patricia Coleman sat in her office surrounded by the evidence of her success, finally understanding that her own children were plotting to destroy the independence she'd spent a lifetime building. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd forgotten that Patricia Coleman had never lost a war she'd chosen to fight. Patricia's fingers moved across her keyboard with the same precision that had once managed software development teams across 3 continents. By 11 p.m., she'd assembled a digital dossier that would have impressed the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Her children had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd spent decades conducting corporate due diligence and competitive intelligence. The first discovery was Sandra's real estate situation. Public records showed her Newport Beach property was worth $2.8 million, but carried a $3.1 million mortgage. The house was underwater by $300,000, with payments 3 months behind despite Patricia's monthly $18,000 transfers. Even more troubling, Sandra had taken out a second mortgage and 2 home equity lines of credit, all secured against the property's inflated pre-pandemic value. Michael's situation was worse. His Austin apartment lease was under a corporate entity called Strategic Consulting Solutions, LLC, a company that existed only on paper. Tax records showed 0 revenue for 2 years running, yet the business carried $180,000 in declared expenses, including the apartment, a luxury car lease, and mysterious client entertainment costs. Patricia's monthly support had been funding an elaborate fiction. But the real revelation came when she accessed her own credit monitoring service. Someone had been checking her credit report monthly for the past 8 months. The inquiries came from 3 sources: Desert Valley Senior Services, Newport Beach Elder Law Associates, and something called Sunset Manor Assisted Living. Patricia's blood ran cold. This wasn't spontaneous concern. This was a systematic campaign that had been in development for most of a year. She pulled up Sunset Manor's website. The facility was luxurious, billing itself as premier senior living for discerning individuals. The monthly fees ranged from $8,000 for basic care to $15,000 for comprehensive services. More interesting was their marketing material, which emphasized, quote, family peace of mind, and, quote, seamless financial transitions for complex estates. A deeper dive into Newport Beach Elder Law Associates revealed a practice specializing in guardianship proceedings and, quote, protective financial management for seniors. Their website featured testimonials from families grateful for help in, quote, difficult situations where loved ones resist necessary care. Patricia recognized the business model immediately. It was a pipeline. Identify wealthy seniors, create documentation of incompetence, facilitate guardianship proceedings, then transfer assets to expensive care facilities while family members gained legal control of remaining wealth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. "Mom, forgot to mention, I set up an appointment for you with Dr. Rachel Morrison tomorrow at 2 p.m. She's a geriatric specialist who can help assess your overall health. The address is 4455 Camelback Road, Suite 200. Patricia looked up Dr. Morrison's credentials. Board-certified geriatrician with a specialty in cognitive assessment and memory disorders. Her practice's website mentioned extensive experience in family-requested evaluations and collaboration with legal professionals for complex senior care decisions. The appointment had been made without Patricia's consent, just like the wellness assessment. Her children were accelerating their timeline, probably because her resistance to the first assessment had worried them. Patricia's phone rang. The caller ID showed her accountant, Robert Chen. "Patricia, I got an unusual call today. Someone claiming to be your daughter asked for detailed information about your financial portfolio. Said there were concerns about your ability to manage your assets independently. What did you tell them?" "Nothing, of course. Client confidentiality." But Patricia, the questions they asked were very specific. About liquid assets, investment structures, how accounts are titled. This wasn't casual concern. Someone's building a financial profile for a reason. Patricia felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had always accompanied high-stakes business negotiations. Her children weren't just planning to have her declared incompetent, they were preparing to seize control of specific assets with surgical precision. "Robert, I need you to do something for me. First, add additional security protocols to my accounts. No information to anyone without written authorization from me personally. Second, I want a complete audit of all my financial relationships to see who else might have been contacted." "Patricia, is everything okay? This sounds serious." "It's very serious. My own children are planning to steal my independence and my wealth, but they're about to learn that I didn't become successful by being naive about human nature." After hanging up, Patricia made a decision that would have surprised her children if they'd known her business history. She'd never been defensive in corporate warfare. She'd always been offensive. If Sandra and Michael wanted to play games with her mental competence, she'd show them exactly how sharp her mind remained. She opened a new document on her computer and began typing. Patricia spent 2 hours documenting every suspicious incident of the past 6 months. Sandra's increasing demands for money coinciding with her mortgage problems. Michael's fictional business that existed solely to justify Patricia's financial support. The coordinated phone calls, the unauthorized credit checks, the medical appointments scheduled without her consent. But she also documented something her children didn't know about, her recent investment successes. While supporting their lifestyles, she'd quietly grown her portfolio by an additional $40 million through cryptocurrency investments and tech startup acquisitions. Her liquid assets alone exceeded $80 million, with real estate and other holdings pushing her net worth well above $120 million. Sandra and Michael thought they were fighting over her existing wealth. They had no idea how much larger the prize had become. At midnight, Patricia made a call to her former colleague, Jennifer Walsh, who now ran a premier private investigation firm in Phoenix. Jennifer's company specialized in corporate espionage and high-net-worth personal security. "Patty, it's been forever. How are you handling retirement?" "I'm about to come out of retirement temporarily. I need your best investigator, and I need them fast. My own children are running a con game against me, and I want to know everything. Their real financial situation, who they're working with, what their timeline is, and what their endgame looks like." Jennifer's tone shifted immediately to professional concern. "How deep do you want us to go? Full corporate intelligence workup. Financial records, communication monitoring, associate mapping, the works. I want to know what they're planning before they know I know what they're planning. That's my kind of assignment. We'll have preliminary results within 48 hours." As Patricia prepared for bed, she felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced since selling her company. Her children thought they were manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman. They were actually taking on a strategic mind that had outmaneuvered Fortune 500 competitors and hostile takeover attempts. But there was something else she needed to do. Something that would protect her while giving her maximum leverage in whatever confrontation was coming. She opened her laptop again and began researching elder law attorneys in Phoenix. Not the kind who helped families gain guardianship over resistant seniors, but the kind who specialized in protecting seniors from family financial abuse. The name that kept appearing in legal journals and high-profile cases was Catherine Sterling, a former federal prosecutor who'd made elder abuse prevention her specialty after watching her own grandfather fall victim to a similar scheme 20 years earlier. Patricia looked at Sterling's credentials. Harvard Law, 15 years as a federal white-collar crime prosecutor, another 10 years in private practice focusing exclusively on elder financial abuse. Her success rate in preventing unwanted guardianships was nearly 100%. More importantly, Sterling's approach was proactive rather than reactive. She didn't wait for families to file guardianship petitions. She helped clients build legal fortresses before attacks could succeed. Patricia sent an email marked Urgent Family Financial Conspiracy and requested an emergency consultation for the following afternoon, right after her unauthorized medical appointment. If Sandra and Michael wanted to declare war on her independence, Patricia would be ready. But they'd forgotten something crucial about their mother's history. She'd never lost a battle where she controlled the strategic planning. As she turned off her office lights, Patricia smiled grimly. Her children were about to learn the difference between supporting someone financially and being financially dependent on them. The power dynamics were about to shift dramatically, and Sandra and Michael were positioned on the wrong side of that equation. Tomorrow would begin their education in why Patricia Coleman had never been anyone's victim, not in business and certainly not in her own family. Patricia arrived at Dr. Morrison's office 15 minutes early, not out of punctuality, but for reconnaissance. The waiting room held an unusual demographic. All patients appeared to be elderly, many accompanied by younger family members who seemed more interested in speaking with staff than comforting their relatives. The magazines were carefully selected: Senior Living Today, Memory Care Quarterly, and Family Caregiving Solutions. She observed the intake process with the analytical eye that had once evaluated competitor strategies. Each elderly patient was asked to complete a cognitive assessment form, while their family members filled out separate paperwork about concerning behaviors and safety incidents. The staff's interactions were professionally sympathetic but focused on documenting problems rather than addressing health concerns. When Patricia's name was called, she followed a nurse named Jessica down a hallway lined with brochures for assisted living facilities, memory care units, and, quote, supportive family counseling for difficult transitions. Dr. Morrison's office felt more like a corporate conference room than a medical facility. Instead of typical medical equipment, it featured a video camera, multiple assessment forms, and a large desk position to create psychological distance between doctor and patient. Mrs. Coleman, thank you for coming in, Dr. Morrison said, her smile professionally warm but not reaching her eyes. Your daughter Sandra has expressed some concerns about changes in your cognitive function and daily living abilities. Patricia settled into the uncomfortable chair, designed to make elderly patients appear frail. I'm curious about what specific concerns Sandra shared, since she hasn't discussed any with me directly. Dr. Morrison consulted her tablet, where notes had been pre-populated before Patricia's arrival. She mentioned incidents of confusion about dates and appointments, difficulty managing complex financial decisions, and some concerning forgetfulness about routine tasks like cooking and home maintenance. Every item was fabricated, but Patricia recognized the strategic thinking behind the lies. Each accusation targeted specific legal criteria for cognitive impairment, temporal disorientation, financial incapacity, and inability to safely maintain independent living. Doctor, I manage a complex investment portfolio worth over $100 million. I maintain a 6,000-square-foot home without assistance, and I've never missed an appointment or forgotten a routine task. What specific incidents is Sandra referring to? Dr. Morrison's expression shifted slightly, like a poker player whose bluff had been called. Sometimes family members notice subtle changes before the individual experiencing them becomes aware. Memory issues often develop gradually, and initial resistance to acknowledging problems is quite common. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Dr. Morrison administering standard cognitive tests that Patricia passed flawlessly. She could recall word lists perfectly, solve mathematical problems mentally, and demonstrate spatial reasoning that exceeded normal ranges for any age group. But Patricia noticed something troubling. Dr. Morrison was writing notes that didn't match her actual responses. When Patricia correctly identified the date, season, and current president, the doctor wrote something about, quote, temporal confusion. When she solved a complex calculation instantly, the notes mentioned difficulty with mathematical concepts. Dr. Morrison, Patricia said carefully, I'd like to review what you're documenting about my responses. Oh, that's just preliminary notes for my dictation later. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Patricia stood up with the authority of someone accustomed to ending meetings when they became unproductive. I think we're finished here. I'll need copies of all documentation from today's session, including your notes and any forms Sandra completed. Mrs. Coleman, please sit down. We haven't completed the assessment. Yes, we have. This appointment was scheduled without my consent. Your questions are based on fabricated concerns, and you're documenting responses that don't match my actual performance. I'm leaving. Dr. Morrison's professional mask slipped completely. Mrs. Coleman, your resistance to medical evaluation is itself a concerning symptom. I'm going to have to note that you became agitated and refused to complete necessary testing. Patricia smiled with the confidence of someone who'd recorded the entire conversation on her smartphone. Note whatever you like, doctor. But be aware that my attorney will be reviewing all your documentation as part of a broader investigation into fraudulent medical assessments. As she left the office, Patricia heard Dr. Morrison making a phone call. The mother is more resistant than expected. We may need to accelerate the timeline. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. Emergency meeting. Major developments. My office in 1 hour. Jennifer's private investigation firm occupied a sleek building in Phoenix's financial district. The conference room walls were covered with flowcharts, photographs, and financial documents that looked like evidence boards from a major criminal investigation. Patty, your children are running a more sophisticated operation than we initially thought, Jennifer said, pulling up files on her laptop. This isn't just family greed. It's an organized business model. The screen showed a network diagram connecting Sandra and Michael to a web of professionals. Dr. Morrison, Newport Beach Elder Law Associates, Sunset Manor, and at least 6 other families whose elderly relatives had been processed through the same system. Sandra isn't just your daughter in this scheme. She's a recruiter. She identifies wealthy seniors, usually through social connections, then introduces them to this network. The professionals each take a percentage of the assets they help redirect into managed care. Patricia studied the financial flows Jennifer had mapped. How much money are we talking about? Over the past 3 years, this network has processed approximately $50 million in senior assets. The families typically get to keep 30 to 40% after facility costs and professional fees. For Sandra, this isn't just about inheriting your money eventually. It's about accessing it immediately while keeping you alive and generating ongoing revenue. Jennifer clicked to another screen showing Sandra's real financial situation. Your daughter owes $400,000 to private lenders, not just credit cards and mortgages. These are hard money loans with serious consequences for default. She needs access to major capital within 60 days, or she loses everything. And Michael? Michael's gambling debts are even worse. He owes $180,000 to underground sports betting operations, the kind of people who don't accept payment plans. Patricia absorbed the information with the calm of someone who'd weathered corporate crises. Her children weren't just greedy. They were desperate. Desperate people made dangerous choices. There's more, Jennifer continued. We intercepted communications between Sandra and the elder law attorney. They're planning to file emergency guardianship papers tomorrow morning, claiming you had a psychotic episode during today's medical evaluation and represent an immediate danger to yourself. Patricia felt cold anger settle in her chest. Based on what evidence? Dr. Morrison's assessment, which will claim you showed signs of paranoid delusion, financial incapacity, and aggressive behavior toward medical staff. Sandra already has temporary housing arranged at Sunset Manor, pending court approval. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity and horrifying in its implications. If successful, Patricia would lose her independence, her home, and control of her wealth within days. Sandra and Michael would become her legal guardians with power to make all decisions about her life, care, and finances. Jennifer, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about protecting my assets. It's about destroying theirs. My children chose to treat me as a financial opportunity rather than a person. Now they're going to learn the consequences of that choice. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed Jennifer the bank account that managed her monthly family support payments. This account currently auto-releases $38,000 monthly to Sandra and Michael. I'm stopping those payments immediately and documenting the reasons why. She opened her banking app and canceled all recurring transfers, then sent formal notices to both children. Due to fraudulent statements about my mental capacity and unauthorized medical evaluations, all financial assistance is suspended pending legal resolution of your guardianship conspiracy. Within minutes, both phones were ringing with panicked calls from Sandra and Michael. Patricia declined all calls but saved the voicemail messages where both children revealed their true priorities. Not her well-being, but their financial survival. Jennifer, I need your team to document everything over the next 24 hours. Every move they make, every professional they contact, every lie they tell. I want complete evidence of this conspiracy before we destroy it. As Patricia drove home, she felt the familiar clarity that had always accompanied her most successful business campaigns. Sandra and Michael had made a fatal error in strategic thinking. They'd assumed their financial leverage over her, when the reality was exactly the reverse. They depended on her money for survival. She'd been supporting their lifestyles for years, covering their debts, enabling their poor decisions. Now that she understood their true motives, that support would become a weapon. By tomorrow morning, Sandra and Michael would face a choice: abandon their guardianship conspiracy or lose their financial lifeline forever. Either way, Patricia would win. But she suspected they were already too deep in debt to retreat, which meant this would become a war, and Patricia Coleman had never lost a war where she controlled the supply lines. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the Camelback Mountains when Patricia's doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m. Through her security system, she watched a sheriff's deputy and a woman in a business suit approach her front door, clipboards in hand. The emergency guardianship petition had been filed even earlier than Jennifer predicted. Patricia had been expecting this moment since 4 a.m., when she'd finished her final preparations. She opened the door wearing a tailored business suit that commanded immediate respect, the same armor she'd worn to congressional hearings about tech industry regulation. Miss Coleman? I'm Deputy Martinez with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. This is Sarah Chen from Adult Protective Services. We have a court order for a welfare check based on concerns about your safety and mental capacity. Patricia accepted the documents with steady hands, scanning them quickly. The petition claimed she'd threatened medical staff, showed signs of paranoid delusion, and was unable to care for herself safely. Sandra's signature was prominent on the supporting affidavit, describing a mother who'd become increasingly erratic and financially irresponsible. Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I think you'll find this situation isn't what it appears to be. Please, come in. Patricia led them to her living room, where she'd strategically arranged evidence of her competence. That morning's completed crossword puzzle, a detailed calendar showing upcoming appointments, financial statements demonstrating sophisticated investment management, and medical records from her recent physical showing excellent health. Miss Coleman, Sarah Chen began, consulting her tablet. Your daughter has expressed serious concerns about your welfare. She mentions finding rotting food in your refrigerator, unpaid bills, and confusion about basic daily tasks. Patricia walked to her kitchen and opened the refrigerator, revealing organized shelves of fresh food, each item clearly labeled with purchase dates. She pulled out a folder containing receipts from the past month, all bills paid in advance, and a household maintenance log that tracked everything from garden irrigation to security system updates. As you can see, my household runs with military precision. Would you like to examine my financial records? I can show you investment returns that most professional fund managers would envy. Deputy Martinez looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, we also received reports about threatening behavior toward medical staff yesterday. Patricia smiled and pulled out her smartphone. Would you like to hear the audio recording of yesterday's appointment? I recorded the entire session when I realized Dr. Morrison was documenting responses that contradicted my actual performance. She played selected portions of the recording, focusing on Dr. Morrison's leading questions and Patricia's sharp, coherent responses. The officers exchanged glances as they heard the doctor making notes that clearly didn't match Patricia's demonstrated competence. "There's something else you should know," Patricia continued, pulling out a thick folder. "My private investigator has uncovered evidence that my children are part of an organized conspiracy to gain control of wealthy seniors' assets. Dr. Morrison, the lawyer who filed this petition, and the assisted living facility they want to place me in are all part of a coordinated business operation." Sarah Chen leaned forward, suddenly more interested. "What kind of evidence?" Patricia spread out Jennifer's investigation results. Financial records showing Sandra and Michael's desperate debt situations, communication intercepts revealing the timeline of their conspiracy, and documentation connecting the same network of professionals to similar cases involving other wealthy seniors. "My daughter owes $400,000 to private lenders and needs immediate access to large amounts of cash. My son has gambling debts that put him in physical danger. This isn't about my welfare, it's about their survival." Deputy Martinez studied the documents with growing concern. "Ma'am, if this is accurate, we're looking at potential elder abuse and conspiracy charges." "It gets worse," Patricia said, producing another folder. "Yesterday, after I canceled their monthly financial support, both children left voicemail messages that clearly prioritized their money needs over my supposed health concerns. Would you like to hear them?" She played Sandra's panicked message. "Mom, you can't just cut off our support. Do you know what this will do to my family? We'll lose everything. You're being completely unreasonable." Michael's message was even more revealing. "Mom, whatever game you think you're playing, you need to stop. We're trying to help you, but if you keep fighting us, you're going to force us to take legal action. Just sign the papers and move to the facility. Everyone will be happier." Sarah Chen was now taking detailed notes. "Ms. Coleman, these messages don't sound like children concerned about a parent's welfare. Because they aren't. They're business partners in a scheme to steal my assets while keeping me alive to generate ongoing revenue for their network of co-conspirators." Patricia's phone buzzed with a call from Catherine Sterling, her elder law attorney. "Excuse me, but this is my lawyer. I think you'll want to hear this conversation." She put the phone on speaker with Sterling's permission. "Patricia, I've reviewed the guardianship petition filed this morning. It's one of the most fraudulent documents I've seen in 15 years of practice. The medical assessment contradicts the doctor's own notes, the supporting affidavits contain provably false statements, and the timeline suggests coordination that violates several state and federal laws." Sterling's voice carried the authority of someone who'd prosecuted similar cases at the federal level. "Officers, I'm Catherine Sterling, representing Ms. Coleman. I'm prepared to file criminal charges against everyone involved in this conspiracy, including the medical professional who falsified assessment results." Deputy Martinez was now clearly treating this as a criminal investigation rather than a welfare check. "Ms. Sterling, what exactly are we looking at here?" "Elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of medical records, and potentially RICO violations if we can prove the network has processed multiple victims. Ms. Coleman isn't a vulnerable senior. She's the target of an organized criminal enterprise." After the officers left with copies of all evidence and promises to investigate the conspiracy, Patricia felt the satisfaction of a perfectly executed business strategy. But she wasn't finished. She called Robert Chen, her accountant, with specific instructions. "Robert, I want you to prepare a complete forensic analysis of every dollar I've given Sandra and Michael over the past 5 years. Every payment, every expense I've covered, every debt I've helped them avoid. I want documentation that would satisfy an IRS audit." "Patricia, that's going to be a substantial amount. Are you sure you want to see those numbers?" "I'm absolutely sure. And Robert, I want you to calculate the market rate interest and opportunity costs on all that money. If they want to treat our relationship as a business transaction, let's see what the real balance sheet looks like." 2 hours later, Robert sent her an analysis that was staggering even by Patricia's standards. Over 5 years, she'd transferred $2.1 million to Sandra and Michael. With market rate interest and opportunity costs, that support had cost her $3.4 million in potential returns. But the psychological impact of the numbers was even more powerful than their financial magnitude. Sandra and Michael had been living lives they couldn't afford, funded entirely by their mother's generosity, while planning to betray her for access to even more money. Patricia's next call was to her estate planning attorney, David Morrison. No relation to the fraudulent doctor. "David, I need to restructure my entire estate plan immediately. I want Sandra and Michael completely disinherited, with detailed documentation of why. But more importantly, I want to create a foundation that will continue fighting elder financial abuse after I'm gone. Patricia, are you sure about disinheriting your children entirely, even after this situation is resolved?" "David, they chose to treat me as a financial asset rather than a human being. They coordinated with criminals to steal my independence and dignity. Some betrayals are unforgivable, and this is one of them." By afternoon, Patricia had restructured her entire $120 million estate. Sandra and Michael would receive nothing. Instead, her wealth would fund the Patricia Coleman Foundation for Elder Justice, with Catherine Sterling as its first director and a mission to prosecute families who prey on elderly relatives. But Patricia saved her most devastating move for last. She called the private lenders who held Sandra's debts and the gambling operations that Michael owed money to. Using her business connections and substantial wealth, she offered to buy both debts at full face value. Within hours, Patricia legally owned her children's obligations. Sandra's $400,000 debt and Michael's $180,000 gambling markers were now held by their mother, who had every right to call them due immediately. Her phone rang with simultaneous calls from both children, but Patricia let them go to voicemail. Their messages were frantic, desperate, and revealed the complete collapse of their guardianship strategy. Sandra's voice was breaking. "Mom, please. The lawyers are saying the case is falling apart. The judge wants to see evidence of the medical claims, and Dr. Morrison is refusing to return our calls. We need to talk." Michael was even more direct. "Mom, I know you bought my gambling debts. Please don't call them in. Give me time to figure something out. I never wanted it to go this far." Patricia smiled as she listened to their panic. Both children now faced a choice: apologize publicly for their conspiracy and accept whatever relationship boundaries she chose to set, or face financial ruin and potential criminal prosecution. But she suspected they were already too committed to their betrayal to choose reconciliation, which meant the real war was just beginning, and Patricia held all the strategic advantages. As the sun set behind the mountains, Patricia sat in her office, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that would soon destroy the people who'd tried to destroy her. She felt no satisfaction in her children's suffering, but she felt absolute certainty about the justice of her response. Sandra and Michael had taught her a painful lesson about the difference between family love and family loyalty. Now she would teach them about the consequences of mistaking generosity for weakness. The phone rang again, another desperate call from Sandra. Patricia declined it and made one final call of the day to Jennifer Walsh. "Jennifer, tomorrow morning I want you to deliver a message to Sandra and Michael. They have 24 hours to publicly withdraw their guardianship petition, apologize for their conspiracy, and submit to complete financial audits. If they refuse, I'll release all evidence to law enforcement and call in their debts immediately." "What if they agree to your terms?" Patricia considered the question carefully. Her children had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, broken trust that couldn't be repaired. But she was still their mother, even if they'd forgotten they were her children. "If they agree, I'll give them one final chance to rebuild their lives without my financial support. But Jennifer, I don't think they will. They've been living beyond their means for so long that they can't imagine survival without access to my money. And if they refuse, then tomorrow they'll learn the difference between having a wealthy mother and having a wealthy enemy." As Patricia prepared for bed, she reflected on the strange turn her retirement had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been a generous mother supporting her children's dreams. Tonight, she was a strategic opponent preparing to destroy them if necessary. The transformation should have felt tragic, but instead it felt like coming home to herself. The woman who'd never backed down from a fight, never accepted defeat, and never allowed anyone to mistake her kindness for weakness. Her children had wanted to control her wealth. Instead, they'd awakened something they should have left sleeping: the ruthless business instincts that had made that wealth possible in the first place. Patricia woke at 4:30 a.m. on what would become the most decisive day of the war against her children. Her phone had been buzzing throughout the night with increasingly frantic messages from Sandra and Michael, but she hadn't read them. Instead, she'd spent the sleepless hours reviewing the psychological profiles Jennifer Walsh had prepared on both children, understanding their weaknesses the way she'd once analyzed competitor strategies. Sandra was driven by social status and lived in constant fear of public humiliation. Her entire identity was built around the image of successful wealth, which explained why losing the Newport Beach house would be devastating beyond just financial ruin. Michael was addicted to the rush of gambling wins and terrified of physical consequences from his debts, making him more likely to panic under pressure. Both children had one fatal flaw in common. They'd never learned to think strategically beyond immediate gratification. While Patricia had been building long-term business empires, Sandra and Michael had been making short-term decisions that felt good in the moment but created catastrophic vulnerabilities over time. At exactly 6 a.m., Patricia made the call that would trigger the final phase of her counterattack. "Good morning, this is Patricia Coleman, calling for Marcus Chen at Chen Private Lending. I believe you hold a $400,000 note on my daughter Sandra Thompson's property in Newport Beach." Marcus Chen's voice carried the professional courtesy of someone who managed high-stakes financial instruments for wealthy clients. "Mrs. Coleman, yes, we hold that note. It's currently 90 days past due, and we're beginning foreclosure proceedings. Mr. Chen, I'd like to purchase that note at full face value plus penalties and interest. Can we close the transaction today?" There was a pause as Chen processed the unexpected offer. Private lenders rarely received full payment on distressed notes, especially from sources outside their normal collection networks. "Mrs. Coleman, may I ask why you're interested in acquiring this particular obligation?" Patricia's smile was invisible but audible in her voice. "Let's just say I have a personal interest in ensuring my daughter meets her financial responsibilities." Within 2 hours, Patricia legally owned Sandra's $400,000 debt, complete with the right to foreclose on the Newport Beach property if payment wasn't received within 30 days. She immediately sent Sandra a formal demand notice, requiring full payment by 5 p.m. that afternoon. Her second call went to Tony Marcello, who managed the underground sports betting operation that held Michael's gambling markers. "Tony, this is Patricia Coleman. I understand my son Michael owes your organization $180,000. Tony's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to read dangerous situations quickly. "Mrs. Coleman, I don't usually discuss client obligations with family members." "I'm not a family member in this context, Mr. Marcello. I'm a potential purchaser. I'll pay the full $180,000 today if you'll transfer Michael's debt to me with all collection rights intact." Tony was silent for a long moment. In his business, family members usually called to beg for more time or negotiate payment plans. They didn't call offering to buy debts at full value. "Lady, you sure you understand what you're getting into? This ain't a bank loan we're talking about." "I understand perfectly. Michael made choices that created consequences. Now I'm going to manage those consequences myself." By 10 a.m., Patricia held both children's financial futures in her hands. But she wasn't finished with her morning's work. Her third call went to Newport Beach City Hall, where public records showed Sandra's house was already subject to multiple liens and tax assessments. A conversation with the tax assessor's office revealed that Sandra owed $47,000 in back property taxes, creating another avenue for foreclosure. Patricia paid the tax bill directly to the city, obtaining a tax lien against Sandra's property that took priority over most other debts. Even if Sandra somehow managed to pay off the private lending note, Patricia now had legal claim to the house through tax lien enforcement. Michael's situation was more complex, but equally vulnerable. His gambling debts were technically illegal, but they were secured by personal guarantees that included his car, his business assets, and a life insurance policy worth $500,000. By purchasing the debt, Patricia had acquired the right to seize everything Michael owned. More importantly, she'd removed the physical threat that had been motivating Michael's desperation. Tony Marcello's organization was known for using violence to collect debts, but Patricia had no intention of harming her son. She simply wanted control over his choices. At 11 a.m., Patricia's phone finally rang with a call she answered. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Sandra's voice was raw with panic and rage. "I just got a foreclosure notice saying you own my mortgage? This has to be some kind of mistake." Patricia settled into her office chair with the calm satisfaction of someone whose strategy was unfolding exactly as planned. "Sandra, there's no mistake. When you decided to conspire against me with criminals, you forced me to protect myself using every legal tool available. But Mom, you can't foreclose on your own daughter's house. What about the grandchildren? What about our family?" The irony was breathtaking. Sandra was appealing to family loyalty after spending a year plotting to steal Patricia's independence and dignity. "Sandra, you forfeited any claim to family consideration when you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and locked in a facility. We never meant for it to go that far. The lawyers said it would just be temporary, just until we could get your finances organized and under your control. Sandra, I've heard the recorded conversations between you and your co-conspirators. I know this was planned for over a year. I know you were recruiting other victims for the same network." Sandra's facade cracked completely. "Mom, please. You have to understand. We owe so much money, and the house is all we have. If we lose it, we lose everything. You already lost everything when you chose to treat me as a target instead of your mother," Michael called 15 minutes later, his voice shaking with barely controlled terror. "Mom, please tell me you didn't really buy my gambling debts. Please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Patricia consulted the loan documents spread across her desk. "Michael, it's not a joke. You now owe me $180,000, payable on demand, secured by all your personal assets, including your car, your business equipment, and your life insurance policy." "But Mom, you don't understand. These weren't normal debts. Tony's people, they were going to hurt me if I didn't pay. I was scared for my life, so you decided to destroy mine instead. Michael, you could have come to me for help with your gambling problem. Instead, you joined a conspiracy to steal my freedom and my wealth. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The whole thing got out of control, and we couldn't stop it once it started." Patricia felt no sympathy for Michael's panic. He'd been willing to have her involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility, willing to let strangers control her life and medical care, willing to watch her wealth be transferred to criminals who would keep her imprisoned indefinitely. "Michael, you have two choices. You can publicly confess your role in the conspiracy against me, provide complete testimony against your co-conspirators, and accept whatever legal consequences result. Or you can continue fighting me, in which case I'll seize all your assets and pursue additional criminal charges. Mom, you're my mother. You can't really be serious about destroying your own children." Patricia's voice carried the steel that had once intimidated hostile board members. "Michael, you stopped being my child when you started treating me like your victim." By noon, both Sandra and Michael had called emergency meetings with their lawyer, David Kellerman, from Newport Beach Elder Law Associates. But Kellerman was dealing with his own crisis, as federal investigators raided his offices, seizing records related to fraudulent guardianship proceedings across 3 states. Patricia watched the news coverage of the raid from her living room, sipping coffee while federal agents carried boxes of evidence from the law firm that had been planning to steal her independence. Jennifer Walsh's investigation had provided law enforcement with detailed evidence of the conspiracy network, and Patricia's case had become the catalyst for a multi-state criminal prosecution. At 2 p.m., her phone rang with a call from Catherine Sterling, her elder law attorney. "Patricia, the federal prosecutors want to meet with you this afternoon. They're ready to file criminal charges against everyone involved in the conspiracy, but they want your testimony to ensure successful prosecution." Patricia looked at the family photos covering her office walls. Images of birthday parties, graduations, holidays, when Sandra and Michael had still seen her as their mother, rather than their financial opportunity. "Catherine, schedule the meeting. It's time to finish this." The federal building in Phoenix buzzed with activity as Patricia arrived for her meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos, who specialized in white-collar crime and elder abuse prosecutions. "Mrs. Coleman, your case represents one of the most sophisticated elder abuse networks we've encountered. The coordination between medical professionals, legal practitioners, and care facilities suggests an organized criminal enterprise operating across state lines." Santos spread out organizational charts Showing the full scope of the conspiracy, we've identified 43 seniors who were processed through this network over the past 5 years. The total financial exploitation exceeds $50 million, with most victims losing their homes, their independence, and substantial portions of their wealth. Patricia studied the faces of other seniors whose families had betrayed them, feeling both anger at the scope of the conspiracy and satisfaction that her resistance had exposed it. What kind of charges are we looking at? For the organizers, RICO violations carrying potential life sentences. For the medical professionals, healthcare fraud with 15-year maximums. For family members like your children, conspiracy and elder abuse charges typically resulting in 2 to 5 years federal prison time. Santos pulled out recorded conversations between Sandra and other family members involved in similar conspiracies. Your daughter wasn't just a victim of this network, Mrs. Coleman. She was actively recruiting other families, earning referral fees for each senior she brought into the system. The revelation hit Patricia like a physical blow. Sandra hadn't just betrayed her own mother, she'd been systematically destroying other families for profit. The monthly support payments Patricia had been sending had been funding Sandra's recruitment of additional victims. How many other families did Sandra target? We've documented at least 6 cases where she made initial contact with wealthy seniors, usually recent widows, and introduced them to Dr. Morrison for wellness assessments. 4 of those seniors were successfully placed under guardianship, with their assets redirected through the network. Patricia felt sick as she realized the full scope of her daughter's crimes. Sandra had been earning money twice. Once from Patricia's monthly support, and again from commissions for recruiting other victims. Her financial desperation hadn't just motivated one conspiracy, it had turned her into a serial predator targeting vulnerable seniors. Mrs. Coleman, we need your testimony to establish the pattern of deception and coordination. Your evidence, combined with the financial records and communications we've seized, will ensure successful prosecution of the entire network. Patricia signed the cooperation agreement without hesitation. Sandra and Michael had made their choices, and now they would face the full legal consequences of those decisions. As she left the federal building, Patricia felt the strange satisfaction of someone who had not only survived an attempt to destroy her life, but had turned that survival into justice for dozens of other victims. Her phone buzzed with one final message from Sandra. "Mom, please don't do this to your own family. We can work this out. Don't let the government destroy us." Patricia deleted the message without responding. Sandra was still thinking like a predator, still trying to manipulate emotional connections to avoid consequences for criminal choices. The war was over, and Patricia had won completely. But the victory felt hollow as she drove home through the desert, knowing that tomorrow would bring the final destruction of the family she'd spent decades building and supporting. Sandra and Michael had forced her to choose between protecting herself and protecting them. They'd never understood that Patricia Coleman had never hesitated to make hard choices when survival was at stake. Now they would learn the consequences of underestimating their mother's capacity for strategic thinking and absolute resolve. 3 months after the courtroom victory, Patricia Coleman stood before a packed auditorium at Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, delivering the keynote address for Elder Law Awareness Week. The woman who had once preferred boardrooms to podiums now found herself at the center of a national movement to protect seniors from family financial predators. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed personal tragedy into public purpose, "I want to tell you about the day I discovered that the 2 people I loved most in the world had spent over a year planning to steal my freedom, my dignity, and my life savings." The audience was riveted as Patricia detailed the conspiracy without the emotional devastation that had characterized her earlier interviews. Time had given her perspective, and her pain had crystallized into a laser-focused mission to prevent other families from experiencing similar destruction. Behind her on a large screen, Jennifer Walsh's investigation charts showed the full scope of the criminal network that had targeted Patricia. What had started as a family betrayal had evolved into the largest elder abuse prosecution in Arizona history. The network my children joined had processed 43 seniors over 5 years, Patricia continued, redirecting over $127 million in assets through fraudulent guardianship proceedings. The average victim lost their independence, their homes, and 73% of their wealth to facilities and professionals who profited from their captivity. In the audience, Detective Sarah Morrison, no relation to the corrupt doctor, took detailed notes. As lead investigator on the case, she'd watched Patricia evolve from victim to the prosecution's most effective weapon against organized elder abuse. The criminal trials had been swift and devastating for the conspirators. Dr. Rachel Morrison faced federal charges for healthcare fraud and conspiracy, with prosecutors presenting evidence that she'd falsified cognitive assessments for over 60 seniors. Her medical license had been revoked, and she was facing 15 years in federal prison. Newport Beach Elder Law Associates had been shut down entirely after investigators discovered the firm had filed fraudulent guardianship petitions in 3 states. The managing partner, David Kellerman, was awaiting trial on racketeering charges that could result in a life sentence under federal RICO statutes. But it was Sandra and Michael's fate that had captured national attention, not because their crimes were the most severe, but because their victim was their own mother. Sandra Thompson, formerly Sandra Coleman, had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and elder abuse charges in exchange for testimony against other network members. She was serving 18 months in federal prison, while her Newport Beach house was seized to pay restitution to other victims. Her children, Patricia's grandchildren, were now living with their father, who had filed for divorce the day Sandra's arrest made national news. Michael Coleman had fought the charges initially, hiring expensive defense attorneys with money borrowed against future inheritance he would never receive. When Patricia's disinheritance became final, his legal strategy collapsed, along with his funding. He eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges, receiving a 2-year sentence in federal prison. The gambling debts that had originally motivated his conspiracy against his mother were now the least of his problems. Upon his release, he would face financial ruin, a federal conviction record, and the knowledge that his greed had cost him the mother who had once been his strongest supporter. Patricia clicked to the next slide, showing the organizational chart of the Patricia Coleman Foundation for Elder Justice, which had launched 2 months earlier with an initial endowment of $25 million. The foundation operates on 3 pillars, she explained to the law students and elder care professionals in the audience: prevention through education, intervention through legal support, and prosecution through collaboration with law enforcement. Catherine Sterling, now the foundation's executive director, joined Patricia on stage to detail their early successes. In just 8 weeks, they'd prevented 12 fraudulent guardianship proceedings across 4 states, provided legal representation to 37 seniors facing family financial abuse, and helped law enforcement identify 3 additional elder abuse networks. What makes our approach unique, Catherine explained, is that we don't wait for abuse to be reported. We proactively monitor guardianship filings, medical assessments that seem designed to establish incompetence, and unusual patterns of family financial requests targeting seniors. The Foundation's technology platform, built with Patricia's Silicon Valley expertise, used artificial intelligence to identify red flags in court filings, medical records, and financial transactions. When multiple seniors in the same geographic area suddenly needed guardianship after evaluations by the same doctor, the system flagged the pattern for investigation. "We've created an early warning system for elder abuse," Patricia said, "because I learned that predators rely on isolation and secrecy. When you shine light on their operations, they scatter like cockroaches." During the question and answer session, a law student asked the question that Patricia had been dreading but expecting. "Mrs. Coleman, do you have any regrets about pursuing criminal charges against your own children?" Patricia paused, considering her response carefully. The pain of losing Sandra and Michael was something she carried daily, but she'd learned to distinguish between grief for lost relationships and guilt over necessary choices. "I grieve for the children I thought I had," she said finally, "but I don't regret stopping the children they actually became. Sandra and Michael made calculated decisions to destroy my life for their financial benefit. They weren't confused or misguided. They were predators who happened to share my DNA." She clicked to a slide showing letters from other seniors whose families had abandoned similar conspiracies after hearing about the Coleman case. "Because of what happened to my family, 47 other seniors kept their independence, their homes, and their dignity. If Sandra and Michael's prosecution prevented even one other family from being destroyed by greed, then justice was served." After the presentation, Patricia drove through the desert to a place she visited every Tuesday evening, the Sunset Manor Assisted Living Facility, where her conspiracy had originally planned to imprison her. The facility had been shut down after investigators discovered systematic billing fraud and evidence of patient financial exploitation, but Patricia wasn't visiting the closed facility. She was meeting with Helen Rodriguez, a 74-year-old former mathematics professor whose son had tried to have her committed to Sunset Manor, using the same network of professionals who'd targeted Patricia. Helen's case had been different in one crucial way. Her conspiracy had succeeded before Patricia's investigation exposed the network. Helen had spent 6 weeks in involuntary care before Patricia's foundation secured her release. "Patricia, I don't know how to thank you," Helen said as they walked through the abandoned facility's courtyard. "When my son had me committed, I thought my life was over. The staff treated me like a prisoner, my finances were frozen, and I had no way to contact the outside world." Patricia had heard similar stories from dozens of survivors over the past months. The psychological trauma of family betrayal, combined with involuntary confinement, created wounds that took years to heal. "Helen, you don't need to thank me. You helped us understand how these facilities operate, which led to criminal charges against the staff. You're a survivor, not a victim." As they talked, Patricia reflected on the strange turn her retirement had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been a wealthy retiree, focused on family and philanthropy. Now she was the face of a national movement, testifying before congressional committees and advising federal agencies on elder abuse prevention. The financial cost of her transformation had been substantial. Legal fees, investigation costs, and foundation startup expenses had consumed over $8 million. But Patricia's investment portfolio had continued growing despite these expenses, and her net worth now exceeded $140 million. More importantly, she'd discovered a sense of purpose that had been missing since selling her company. Building Coleman Technologies had been about creating value in the marketplace. Building the foundation was about protecting human dignity and family bonds from those who would exploit them for profit. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. "Patty, federal prosecutors in Florida want to consult on a case that looks identical to yours. 3 siblings trying to gain guardianship of their father who owns commercial real estate worth $50 million. Can you fly to Miami next week?" Patricia smiled as she typed her response. "Book the flights, let's go save another family." As she drove home through the desert evening, Patricia thought about the letter she'd received that morning from Sandra in federal prison. It was the first communication from either child since their sentencing 3 months earlier. The letter was brief and focused entirely on Sandra's own suffering. The harsh conditions of prison life, the social ostracism of her children, the financial devastation of her family. There was no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused Patricia, no recognition of the conspiracy's impact on other victims, no genuine remorse for choosing greed over family love. Patricia had read the letter twice, then placed it in her safe next to her original investigation files. Sandra was still thinking only about herself, still failing to understand that consequences were the natural result of choices. The letter had requested financial help for Sandra's children, Patricia's grandchildren who were now essentially orphaned by their parents' criminal choices. It was a request that revealed Sandra still didn't understand the fundamental truth about trust. Once completely broken, it could never be restored. Patricia had already arranged educational trusts for her grandchildren, administered by independent trustees who would ensure the funds supported their development without enabling their parents' mistakes. The children would receive excellent educations and financial security, but they would also learn that wealth came with responsibility, and that family meant protecting each other, not exploiting each other. As she pulled into her driveway, Patricia saw the lights of her home office where she spent her evenings now, not managing investments for personal gain, but coordinating a national network of advocates who shared her commitment to protecting seniors from family predators. Tomorrow she would fly to Florida to help another family navigate the same nightmare she'd survived. Next week she would testify before a Senate committee about federal legislation to strengthen guardianship oversight. The following month she would open the foundation's second office in California, where elder abuse networks were targeting tech industry retirees with substantial portfolios. Patricia Coleman had lost her children, but found her true calling. The woman who had once built companies to create market value was now building systems to protect human dignity. It was the most important work of her life, and it had been born from the most painful betrayal she'd ever experienced. But as she looked at photos of the seniors her foundation had already helped protect, Patricia knew that Sandra and Michael's conspiracy had ultimately failed in its deepest purpose. They had tried to steal her independence and dignity. Instead, they had given her a mission that would protect thousands of other families from experiencing the same destruction. In trying to destroy their mother, Sandra and Michael Coleman had accidentally created their mother's greatest legacy. 6 weeks after Patricia's cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors, the first domino in the elder abuse network fell when Dr. Rachel Morrison attempted suicide in her Mesa office, leaving behind a detailed confession that implicated dozens of co-conspirators across 4 states. The confession, discovered by her office manager the next morning, would become the prosecution's roadmap to dismantling what the FBI now called, quote, the largest organized elder exploitation ring in American history. Patricia received the news while reviewing financial statements in her home office, the same space where she'd first discovered Sandra's suspicious requests for emergency funding. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos called personally to brief her on the developments. Mrs. Coleman, Dr. Morrison's confession confirms everything your investigation uncovered, but the scope is much larger than we initially realized. She documents over 200 fraudulent cognitive assessments spanning 7 years, with detailed records of payments received from families and facilities. Patricia set down her coffee cup with steady hands, though the magnitude of the revelation shook her. 200 seniors? How is that possible without anyone noticing the pattern? Morrison was careful to spread her work across multiple jurisdictions and medical systems. She'd evaluate seniors in Phoenix, then move to Tucson, then to Las Vegas, never staying in one location long enough to trigger oversight. But she kept meticulous records of every case, including financial projections for asset seizures. The confession revealed the sophisticated business model behind the conspiracy. Families would pay Dr. Morrison between $15,000 and $50,000 for fraudulent assessments, depending on the senior's net worth. She would then split those fees with cooperating attorneys, facility administrators, and recruitment networks like the one Sandra had been operating. Mrs. Coleman, there's something else. Morrison specifically mentions your daughter as one of her most successful recruiters. Sandra earned over $240,000 in referral fees over 18 months, targeting seniors in high-end social circles throughout Southern California. Patricia felt physically ill as she processed the information. While she'd been sending Sandra $18,000 monthly to support her lifestyle, Sandra had been earning additional income by destroying other families. The money Patricia provided had simply supplemented Sandra's criminal enterprise, not replaced it. How many families did Sandra target? 14 confirmed cases, with 8 successful placements. Mrs. Coleman, your daughter wasn't just a desperate person who made bad choices. She was a professional predator who specialized in identifying vulnerable wealthy seniors and earning money from their exploitation. After hanging up, Patricia walked through her house, stopping at family photos that now felt like evidence of her own naivete. She'd raised Sandra and Michael, supported their dreams, funded their mistakes, and somehow produced children capable of systematically destroying elderly people's lives for profit. Her phone buzzed with a call from Jennifer Walsh, whose investigation had expanded beyond Patricia's case to assist federal prosecutors with the broader conspiracy. Patty, we've got breaking news from the Nevada raids. They found the central database that tracked all victims, their assets, and distribution of profits. This thing was run like a Fortune 500 company, complete with quarterly performance reviews and expansion plans. Jennifer's team had uncovered evidence that the elder abuse network was planning to expand into Texas and Florida, targeting tech industry retirees and real estate magnates with sophisticated social engineering techniques. Sandra's success in California had made her a model for recruitment operations in other high-wealth regions. There's more, Patty. We found communications between Sandra and someone called the Coordinator, who was managing multiple recruitment teams across the western United States. Sandra wasn't just working for this network. She was being groomed to run a regional division. The revelation transformed Patricia's understanding of her daughter's betrayal. This wasn't a desperate person making one terrible decision. It was a calculating criminal who had identified elder abuse as a profitable career path. Patricia's doorbell rang, interrupting her dark thoughts. Through the security system, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 50s holding flowers and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm Margaret Chen. My mother, Dorothy Chen, was one of the seniors your daughter targeted. I wanted to thank you personally for exposing this conspiracy." Patricia invited Margaret inside, recognizing the need to face the human consequences of Sandra's crimes directly. Margaret's story was heartbreakingly familiar. An 82-year-old widow with Alzheimer's early symptoms who'd been befriended by Sandra at a country club charity event. "Sandra was so charming, so concerned about my mother's welfare. She convinced Mom that she needed a medical evaluation for her own safety, then arranged the appointment with Dr. Morrison. Within 2 weeks, Mom was declared incompetent and placed in a facility in Las Vegas." Margaret pulled out photographs of her mother before and after the conspiracy. The transformation was shocking. From a vibrant woman engaged in social activities to a hollow-eyed figure in institutional clothing, staring blankly at the camera. "We lost our family home to pay for her care. Mom's savings were drained within 6 months. By the time we realized what was happening, she'd been medicated into compliance and couldn't advocate for herself." Patricia studied the photos with growing horror. This was what Sandra had been planning for her: institutional imprisonment, chemical sedation, and systematic financial exploitation until death. "Margaret, where is your mother now?" "She died 3 months ago, still in that facility, still drugged into submission. She never understood why her family had abandoned her, because that's what the staff told her, that we'd given up on her because she was too difficult to manage." The cruelty was breathtaking. The conspiracy didn't just steal money and independence. It destroyed seniors' understanding of their own family relationships, leaving them to die believing they'd been abandoned by the people who loved them most. "Mrs. Coleman, when I saw you on the news fighting back against your own children, I felt hope for the first time since Mom died. You showed that these people can be stopped, that seniors don't have to be helpless victims." After Margaret left, Patricia sat in her living room, processing the weight of responsibility she now carried. Her personal victory over Sandra and Michael had become a symbol for thousands of families affected by elder abuse networks. But with that symbolism came the obligation to ensure justice extended beyond her own case. She called Catherine Sterling, who had been coordinating legal support for other families affected by the conspiracy. "Catherine, I want to establish a victim compensation fund using my own money. Every family that lost assets to this network should receive restitution, regardless of what the criminal proceedings recover. Patricia, that could cost tens of millions of dollars. Some families lost everything. Then we'll return everything. Catherine, I've spent my career building wealth, and my children chose to weaponize that wealth against innocent people. The least I can do is use it to repair some of the damage they caused." Patricia's decision to establish the fund wasn't just about money. It was about acknowledging her own role in enabling Sandra's crimes through years of financial support that had subsidized her daughter's criminal activities. That evening, Patricia received an unexpected visitor. Robert Kellerman, Sandra's lawyer from Newport Beach Elder Law Associates, arrived unannounced despite the fact that his law firm was under federal investigation. "Mrs. Coleman, I need to speak with you about your daughter's situation. There may be ways to resolve this matter without destroying your family." Patricia studied Kellerman through her security system before deciding to hear what he had to say. She opened the door with the confidence of someone who held all the strategic advantages. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm surprised you're not more concerned about your own legal situation. The FBI raided your offices last month." Kellerman shifted uncomfortably, clearly hoping Patricia wasn't aware of the full scope of the federal investigation. "Mrs. Coleman, that's a separate matter. I'm here to discuss Sandra's case specifically." "What about Sandra's case?" "She's admitted to conspiracy, elder abuse, and fraud. She's earned hundreds of thousands of dollars, destroying elderly people's lives. What exactly is there to discuss?" Kellerman pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be legal documents. "Sandra is willing to provide complete cooperation against the larger network in exchange for reduced charges. She could serve as little as 6 months if she testifies against the primary organizers." Patricia laughed with genuine amusement. Mr. Kellerman, Sandra is already providing complete cooperation. The federal prosecutors have her confession, her financial records, and her communications with other conspirators. They don't need to negotiate with her. They have everything they need to prosecute the entire network. Kellerman's expression revealed that he hadn't understood the strength of the prosecution's case. But surely you don't want to see your own daughter in federal prison for years. Family relationships can survive legal difficulties if handled properly. Mr. Kellerman, my relationship with Sandra ended when she decided to treat me as a criminal target rather than her mother. There is no family relationship to preserve. Patricia opened the door, signaling the end of the conversation. I suggest you focus on your own legal defense rather than trying to negotiate deals for conspirators who've already confessed. As Kellerman left, Patricia felt the satisfaction of watching the conspiracy's final desperate attempts to avoid consequences. Every plea for mercy, every attempt at manipulation, every effort to exploit family loyalty was falling flat against the overwhelming evidence of systematic criminal enterprise. Her phone rang with a call from Maria Santos, who had additional updates on the expanding federal investigation. Mrs. Coleman, we've arrested the Nevada coordinator who is managing the Western Regional operations. His real name is Thomas Bradley, and he's a former pharmaceutical executive who identified elder care as an underregulated industry ripe for exploitation. The revelation that the conspiracy had been organized by corporate executives, rather than desperate families, changed everything. This wasn't just greed or desperation. It was systematic predation designed to extract maximum profit from vulnerable populations. Mrs. Coleman, Bradley's records show that Sandra was being fast-tracked for promotion to regional director, with plans to expand into international markets targeting wealthy American retirees living abroad. Your daughter wasn't just a participant in this conspiracy. She was being groomed to lead its expansion. Patricia felt the final pieces of her family relationship with Sandra crumble as she understood the full scope of her daughter's criminal ambitions. Sandra hadn't been driven to desperation by debt. She'd been building a career in elder exploitation. The war was over, the network was destroyed, and justice was being served. But as Patricia looked at family photos she could never display again, she wondered if victory against evil always required such complete personal loss. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more victims seeking justice, and more evidence of the sophisticated cruelty that had masqueraded as family concern. Patricia Coleman had saved herself and dozens of other seniors from exploitation, but the cost had been learning that the children she'd raised had become monsters she'd never imagined possible. The truth was both liberating and devastating. In destroying the conspiracy against her, Patricia had also discovered that there had never been any real family to preserve. 2 years after the conspiracy against her began, Patricia Coleman stood in the marble-floored lobby of the newly opened Coleman Center for Elder Justice in downtown Phoenix, watching as the final piece of artwork was installed. The bronze sculpture depicted an elderly woman standing defiantly, one hand raised as if stopping an attacker, the other extended protectively toward a group of vulnerable figures behind her. The plaque below read, "In memory of Dorothy Chen and the 200 seniors whose voices were silenced, and in honor of those who refused to be silent." The center represented the transformation of Patricia's personal tragedy into systematic change. What had started as a mother's fight against her own children had evolved into a $150 million foundation that had revolutionized elder abuse prevention across America. Mrs. Coleman, the delegation from Japan has arrived for the international conference, announced Dr. Sarah Martinez, the center's research director and former FBI financial crimes analyst. They're particularly interested in your technology platform for identifying elder abuse networks before they can establish operations. Patricia nodded, adjusting the navy blazer that had become her signature look during congressional testimony and international presentations. At 70, she'd found her life's most important work, but the journey to this moment had been paved with revelations that continued to shock even seasoned investigators. The final trial in the elder abuse conspiracy had concluded 6 months earlier, with sentences that reflected the scope of the crimes. Thomas Bradley, the pharmaceutical executive who'd organized the Western Regional Network, received life in federal prison under RICO statutes. Dr. Rachel Morrison, whose confession had unraveled the entire conspiracy, with serving 25 years for healthcare fraud and conspiracy charges. Sandra Thompson, formerly Sandra Coleman, had received an 8-year federal sentence after her cooperation failed to mitigate the evidence of her leadership role in recruiting victims. During her sentencing hearing, she'd finally addressed her mother directly for the first time since her arrest. "Mom, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to, but I want you to know that I didn't start out wanting to hurt people. It just became so easy to make money, and we needed it so badly. By the time I understood what we were really doing to these families, I was in too deep to stop." Patricia had listened to Sandra's statement from the gallery, feeling neither satisfaction nor forgiveness, only the hollow sadness of watching a stranger wearing her daughter's face accept responsibility for destroying hundreds of lives. Michael's sentence had been lighter, 3 years federal prison, primarily because his role had been limited to participating in the conspiracy against Patricia rather than recruiting other victims. But his gambling addiction had continued even during his legal proceedings, and he'd accumulated additional debts that would ensure financial instability for decades after his release. The most shocking revelation had come during Thomas Bradley's trial, when prosecutors presented evidence that the elder abuse network had been conducting research on optimization strategies for extracting maximum wealth from seniors while maintaining their cooperation. The research included psychological profiles of different personality types, medication protocols for managing resistance, and financial modeling for determining optimal exploitation timelines. "We weren't just stealing from elderly people," Bradley had testified during his plea hearing. "We were developing industrial-scale methods for converting senior citizens into profit-generating assets. The families were our sales force, and the victims were our inventory." The clinical language had horrified even experienced prosecutors, but it had also provided Patricia with clarity about her children's choices. Sandra and Michael hadn't just been greedy. They'd been recruited into a system designed to strip them of empathy and turn family love into a weapon against vulnerable relatives. Now, as Patricia prepared to address the International Conference on Elder Financial Protection, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman who'd once focused on building personal wealth now dedicated her days to protecting others from those who would exploit seniors' trust and vulnerability. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia began her keynote address to an audience of law enforcement officials, social workers, and policymakers from 37 countries. "I want to tell you about the morning I discovered that love without boundaries becomes enablement, and enablement without accountability becomes complicity in evil." The conference hall fell silent as Patricia detailed not just her own experience, but the systematic research her foundation had conducted on family-based elder abuse. Their studies had identified patterns that existed across cultures and economic systems, revealing that financial exploitation by adult children was dramatically underreported because victims were reluctant to acknowledge that their own families had betrayed them. The Coleman Center has documented over 3,000 cases of family-perpetrated elder abuse in the past 18 months alone, Patricia continued, clicking to a slide showing global statistics. "Our research indicates that adult children are responsible for approximately 60% of elder financial abuse, yet they receive the lightest criminal penalties because courts and prosecutors struggle to treat family relationships as criminal enterprises." The center's technology platform had become the gold standard for identifying elder abuse networks before they could establish operations. Using artificial intelligence to monitor court filings, medical assessments, and financial transactions, the system could identify suspicious patterns that indicated coordinated exploitation attempts. In the past year, our early warning system has prevented 127 fraudulent guardianship proceedings, identified 43 medical professionals filing suspicious cognitive assessments, and helped law enforcement investigate 16 criminal networks operating across state lines, Patricia reported to enthusiastic applause. But statistics couldn't capture the personal transformations that had resulted from Patricia's work. She'd spent hundreds of hours counseling families torn apart by elder abuse, helping seniors rebuild their lives after exploitation, and supporting adult children who discovered their siblings were stealing from elderly parents. The most meaningful part of her work involved the Coleman Center's Victim Advocacy Program, which provided legal representation, counseling services, and financial assistance to seniors targeted by family members. The program had helped over 800 families navigate the complex intersection of criminal law, family relationships, and financial recovery. Mrs. Coleman asked Dr. Kenji Tanaka from Tokyo University's Center for Aging Studies, "How do we balance protecting seniors from exploitation while preserving family autonomy and cultural values around filial responsibility?" Patricia had wrestled with this question throughout her transformation from victim to advocate. "Dr. Tanaka, I've learned that true family responsibility means protecting our elders' dignity and independence, not managing their lives for our convenience or benefit. When families start making decisions based on their own needs rather than their elders' welfare, they've crossed the line from caregiving to exploitation." She clicked to a slide showing the financial impact of the center's work. "We've helped families recover over $47 million in stolen assets. But more importantly, we've helped 1,200 seniors maintain their independence and dignity in their own homes and communities." The center's research had also influenced federal legislation, including the Elder Justice Enhancement Act that Patricia had helped draft. The law created federal penalties specifically for family members who exploited elderly relatives, closed loopholes that had allowed fraudulent guardianship proceedings, and established funding for elder abuse prevention programs. During the conference's afternoon session, Patricia participated in a panel discussion with other advocates who'd transformed personal tragedies into systemic change. Margaret Chen, whose mother Dorothy had died in the conspiracy that targeted Patricia, now directed the center's family education program. "Mrs. Coleman saved my family by refusing to be victimized," Margaret told the international audience. "But she also saved hundreds of other families by showing that seniors don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from their own children." The panel discussion revealed how Patricia's case had inspired similar resistance movements in other countries. Elder advocates in Germany, Australia, and Canada had established programs based on the Coleman Center model, creating an international network dedicated to preventing family-based elder exploitation. As the conference concluded, Patricia stood again in the center's lobby, surrounded by photographs of seniors who'd been helped by her foundation's work. Their faces told stories of dignity preserved, independence maintained, and trust restored after betrayal. Her phone buzzed with a message from her estate attorney. "Patricia, Sandra's release from federal prison is scheduled for next month. She's requested permission to contact you. How would you like me to respond?" Patricia stared at the message for a long moment, considering the daughter who'd once been her pride and joy, then became her greatest adversary, and now existed as a stranger seeking forgiveness that might never come. She typed her response carefully. "Please inform Sandra that if she's genuinely committed to making amends, she can volunteer at the Coleman Center's Victim Services Program. Actions speak louder than words, and there are hundreds of families who need help rebuilding what people like her destroyed." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opportunity for Sandra to demonstrate whether prison had changed her fundamental character. Patricia had learned that trust, once completely broken, could only be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through words or promises. As Patricia prepared to leave the center, she stopped at the memorial wall dedicated to seniors who died while under fraudulent guardianship or in facilities that exploited their vulnerability. Dorothy Chen's photograph held a place of honor, alongside nearly 200 other faces representing the human cost of treating elderly people as financial opportunities. "Mrs. Coleman?" called a voice from behind her. She turned to see James Mitchell, an 89-year-old former aerospace engineer, whose son had tried to steal his pension through a guardianship conspiracy similar to the one that had targeted Patricia. "James, how are you adjusting to your new apartment?" James smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd reclaimed control of his life. "Patricia, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. When my son tried to have me declared incompetent, I thought my life was over. Your foundation gave me lawyers who believed in my capacity to make my own decisions." James had become one of the center's most effective advocates, speaking to families about recognizing the warning signs of elder abuse and encouraging seniors to seek help before exploitation could succeed. "Patricia, there's something I want you to know. My son called last week asking for money again. 2 years ago, I would have given it to him out of guilt and fear. But now I told him that if he wanted a relationship with me, he needed to earn it through respect and honesty, not manipulation and threats. Stories like James's reminded Patricia why her work mattered beyond statistics and policy changes. Every senior who maintained their independence, every family that avoided destruction through exploitation, every adult child who learned to respect rather than manipulate their elderly parents represented a victory against the forces that had tried to destroy her own family. As Patricia drove home through the Arizona desert, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she'd been a wealthy retiree, focused on family and philanthropy. Tonight, she was returning home as someone who'd transformed personal betrayal into a movement that protected vulnerable people across the world. Her house in Scottsdale remained the same architectural masterpiece it had always been, but the family photos that once covered every surface had been replaced by awards from advocacy organizations, letters from grateful families, and pictures of seniors who'd maintained their dignity despite attempts to exploit them. Patricia sat in her home office, the same space where she'd first discovered Sandra's financial desperation and began investigating the conspiracy against her. The awards and recognition certificates covering the walls told the story of how completely her life had changed direction. She opened her laptop and began reviewing applications for the Coleman Center's newest program, an international fellowship that would train advocates in other countries to identify and prevent elder abuse networks before they could establish operations. Among the applications was one from a young lawyer in Seoul whose grandmother had been targeted by a conspiracy similar to the one Patricia had defeated. Another came from a social worker in Manchester whose elderly clients were being systematically exploited by family members working with corrupt care facilities. Each application represented someone who decided to fight back against the exploitation of vulnerable seniors, inspired by Patricia's refusal to accept victimization as inevitable. As she prepared for bed, Patricia felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd found their true calling, even though it had emerged from the most painful experience of her life. Sandra and Michael had tried to steal her independence and dignity, but instead, they'd accidentally given her the most important mission of her life. The irony was profound. In trying to destroy their mother, Sandra and Michael Coleman had created a legacy that would protect thousands of seniors from experiencing the same betrayal they'd attempted. Patricia turned off her office lights and walked through her quiet house, knowing that tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims to help, and new opportunities to transform personal pain into systematic protection for vulnerable people. She'd lost her children but found her purpose. The trade wasn't fair, but it was necessary, and it had created something that would outlast any individual tragedy. In the end, Patricia Coleman's greatest victory wasn't defeating the conspiracy against her. It was ensuring that her experience would prevent countless other families from being destroyed by the same evil that had consumed her own. The woman who'd once built technology companies had built something far more important, a shield that protected human dignity against those who would exploit love for profit. It was the legacy she'd never planned, but would always be proud of. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.